Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler has a new plan when it comes to addressing large homeless encampments, and it sure sounds much like the city's old plan: sweep the people out and remove all of the tents and belongings. In many ways, it's a return to an old policy. I'm Andrew Thien, and this is Beat Check with the Oregonian. Up next, my colleague Nicole Hayden, who covers homelessness for the Oregonian and OregonLive. We talked about why the mayor believes these sweeps are necessary and a good policy move, where people are ending up, what advocates have to say about the policy, and the potential ripple effects from the plan that started in earnest in Old Town Chinatown last month. A quick note, you'll hear some construction noise in the background behind Nicole, starting about 10 minutes into our conversation. We've been doing this podcast remotely since March 2020, and sometimes things just happen out of our control. We always try our best. Here's our conversation. Nicole Hayden, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So you're always busy on your beat, and in recent days, Mayor Wheeler made a big announcement for a new strategy going citywide that's built on kind of a controversial one that was executed in Old Town a little more than a month ago. So remind us what happened in Old Town and why is this going citywide?
In Old Town, the city came in and removed tents, like hundreds of tents, displacing hundreds of people, mostly at pressure from the local community and business association because folks were saying it was impacting their businesses, making it unsafe for folks to live there. So the city came, kind of forced everyone to move to other neighborhoods, threw away all of their stuff. And of the, I think maybe 160 folks who were forced to move, less than 20 got shelter beds, but the city didn't track to find out if those folks were connected to mental health services or housing or long-term shelter prior to moving. Mm-hmm. But the mayor has decided this is a successful strategy in his view, despite not knowing where people ended up. Because the streets are clean and businesses are happy. So the city plans to do more mass sweeps throughout the city in the future.
I'm just curious how we got to this point, Nicole, because it seems like mass sweeps have been a polarizing issue dating back years, and you've done so much reporting on Laurelhurst Park and sweeps there, but it's happened on the Springwater Corridor. People have been displaced. Pick a year, it's been a polarizing thing, and here we are again.
Yeah, it kind of feels like we're going backwards in our policy. In 2017 or 18, when there was the Martin v. Boise decision, it said all Western states couldn't force people to move off of public land if they didn't have any place to go without offering them an equal or better opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so since the city offers a shelter bed, that kind of fulfills that requirement. But we know from our reporting that 95% of people who are swept say they never come in contact with an outreach worker prior to being swept, so they're never offered a shelter bed. And if they are, a shelter bed is typically not something people want because you're sleeping inches from strangers and you don't feel safe. And yeah, after Laurelhurst Springwater Corridor, we have learned that you can't just drop in a couple days or even a few weeks before a sweep and expect to make substantial impact in people's lives. You need to take months or years to build up trust before maybe someone will accept services because they've just been traumatized by what they've been through.
Yeah. And we've talked about this several times, but you had this survey where you teamed up with Street Roots and surveyed 300 people who were living outdoors in Portland. Mm-hmm. Given kind of your takeaways from that, what do you think the ramifications are of this policy going citywide?
Yeah, we know that more than 60% of the homeless population has some sort of mental health illness. And when you're living on the street, things like extreme exhaustion can make those symptoms worse, but also other traumatic events like a sweep, being forced to move out from where you're living, where you might feel safe, that can be a trigger for some mental health illnesses. It can cause psychosis. It also just makes people lose trust with officials and folks who are trying to help. And we know that the worse the symptoms get and they progress as the years go on, it's harder to house those folks. And those are, our most vulnerable individuals with the least access to resources. So definitely there's a ripple effect when you're talking about sweeps.
For your story about kind of the formal announcement from the mayor talking about this policy, you talked to leaders at Blanchet House down in Old Town, which is a community institution. What did they tell you about just kind of how people are doing right now? Because it's not just, it's obviously the pandemic. It's been an exceedingly difficult year for everyone, but for most vulnerable people especially. Can you talk about what you heard from them? Because I thought that was pretty salient reporting.
They serve meals 3 times a day. So, and it's a no barriers meal service. Folks can come in and sit down. Mm-hmm. So they really get an on the ground view of like who's homeless in Old Town and what they're dealing with. And they said the sweeps definitely add to the trauma, that there are folks with just severe mental health issues that really need more support than anything that's being offered prior to sweeps. And I was actually at Blanchet House this morning during their breakfast meal service to kind of see the population that they're working with and help out. And, a lot of folks showed up that I frequently interact with on the street. And when I see them, they have their guard up, they're high anxiety, they're stressed out. You can just see that they're tense. But watching folks come in one by one this morning, they were clearly more relaxed. Their guard was down. They felt safe. Some people just like put their head down on the table and slept the whole hour because it was the first time they felt safe sleeping in the past 12 hours. So when you provide something safe and supportive and let people feel accepted, it completely changes their demeanor, and it can really go a long way. And that's like the polar opposite of, what sweeps do. And
to put a finer point on it, their Blanchet House wasn't doing indoor dining due to the pandemic, right? So people are feeling more comfortable now. So maybe it's a good time to pivot to some of these city policies that are designed to be safe places for people to go. Commissioner Dan Ryan had been leading this effort. By the time people hear this, the first village is supposed to be open, right? Where is it? And sorry, you can hear the construction. We're talking in a city, and so that's just part of the situation. But where is this first village? And can you describe what it looks like and what's there?
This village is along Multnomah Boulevard, and when you go to it, you can't really tell that it backs up to a neighborhood because there's a thick surrounding of trees that separate it from the houses behind it. So it feels pretty secluded. It also, on the same area, there's a Portland Bureau of Transportation staging area. So there's tons of big construction trucks coming in and out. So it is a bit loud, and probably will disturb folks who are trying to sleep once they move in there. You have these tiny homes that lock, and you have twin size mattresses that are pretty thick in them. And so it gives a more sense of dignity than going to a mass shelter. Yeah, it does give a sense of community too, how they're set up. It feels like a real tiny neighborhood. There are some things that, of course could be better. They don't have ovens or stoves. They have a shared kitchenette that has 4 microwaves and 2 fridges. So, I think this shelter maybe can house up to 60 folks. So, you think of 60 people sharing 2 refrigerators and 4 microwaves.
Yeah.
You aren't really able to do money saving strategies for healthy food, cook in bulk, freeze it. So these folks will probably be eating pretty expensive, unhealthy microwave meals. But that's a small thing compared to, where they're coming from on the street, and having a safe place to be is definitely what people have been asking for.
Yeah, so this has been a long time coming to get to the opening of the first location. Remind us why it took so long.
Yeah, it took so long because honestly, I think the folks proposing it just didn't realize how long it would take to plan and construct these villages. We were hoping they would open last year, and it's about a more than a year delay, but it's trying to find suitable places to put the villages where people have easy access to transportation, can walk or take the bus to grocery stores, have amenities that they can access without cars. And in some instances, neighborhoods just did not want these villages in their community. So it was hard for the city to find places where people were willing to accept these folks as neighbors.
So going back to, the city doesn't track where the people who are living in Old Town Chinatown who are displaced in May, where they went. But do we have any idea, or have you had any inklings or heard anything about where people ended up?
So folks started moving to the downtown corridor and the Pearl District since they were told they have to at least move a few blocks away. But the city has already come in and started sweeping those folks, even though they've just been there a couple weeks or a few days. There was just a sweep in the Pearl District yesterday I saw. And so essentially people just are shuffling around in the downtown area.
Let's take a quick break, and then we'll talk more with Nicole Hayden, who covers homelessness for the Oregonian and OregonLive. So we are back with Nicole Hayden, who covers homelessness for the Oregonian and OregonLive, and lives, in inner Northwest Portland. So we've got some of the sounds of the city in the background, and that's just part of doing a podcast when we're not in the newsroom. It's pretty loud in the newsroom sometimes too with construction, but anyways, forgive us. So I'm curious, Nicole, are there any success stories that you can point to from your reporting in Portland, places where we're getting it right?
One thing I really enjoy reporting on right now is Portland Street Response, which sends mental health workers instead of police to folks in mental health crisis on the street. And they recently expanded from their kind of test area in the Lentz neighborhood to citywide a couple months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know that expansion has been slower than they hoped because they've been having a hard time hiring to fill those new teams in the past couple months. But it has been a success. People who interact with them say they have felt like they were treated with compassion, that they were believed, that they felt they could trust the person they were talking to, and that they really sat down with them and not only addressed what they were dealing with in that moment, but taught them like coping skills or mental health skills to help them get through maybe some minor psychosis episodes in the future. And they also have a more long-term team that can connect with people and help them access other resources in the community. So it's not necessarily just an emergency response, but they're able to stay with folks longer term if needed.
As a citizen, people want quick solutions to these intractable social problems that are much more complicated and larger than just Portland, right? So it's something that we're in the thick of things, seeing this roll out. But I know we've talked about this a few times, but it could be a while until maybe there's some more visible evidence of the program being a success.
Yeah, I think one thing that folks are a bit impatient with is the rollout of how we're using the homeless tax funds. We want to see more programs rolling out, but there was a delay in collecting funds, and that's just a natural part of a new tax. And hopefully this new fiscal year is when we're actually going to see the first real true bulk of money coming in. So I'm crossing my fingers this next year we're going to see more of that evidence people are hoping for.
Well, that might be a good pivot to a recent story you reported on, and that's an audit that looked into how the city and Multnomah County, the Joint Office of Homelessness, handled a specific project. Could you tell us about the story of the Sandy Studios and what, if anything, it says about the broader picture here?
This was a publicly funded apartment complex for veterans. And the county contracted with a nonprofit called Do Good Multnomah, and they kind of ran the day-to-day. But the folks who were living in this complex, so it had 32 units, so at least 32 people were living here, really had issues with the quality of life and found that the building's condition wasn't up to par and things weren't getting fixed that needed to be. So the Do Good Multnomah, the nonprofit, said they no longer wanted to be in charge of this because it just wasn't doing well. So they started working to relocate people to other apartments where they could find spaces for people and try to address the building. And yeah, it's unfortunate that these folks, their lives are disrupted, but as you said, it kind of hints at maybe some larger things. I've been in some publicly funded apartments that are just so nice, brand new, beautiful, one bedrooms with a brand new washer and dryer. I've been to other apartments that haven't been as nice. They have been in older buildings with plumbing issues. Folks are living in 200 square foot units that just have space for, a bed and a microwave essentially. And a whole floor is sharing to bathrooms. And oftentimes when I visit, at least one of the bathrooms is out of commission. And sometimes it's the ADA accessible bathroom, and there's many people who are disabled living in these buildings, so that creates a real problem. And so it's an argument of, well, is this better than living on the street? And a lot of times it is, but some people I've talked to in those buildings say they might just want to move back to the street because they're not happy with where they're living.
We talked a little bit about mass shelters. There are, in theory, enough beds at these shelters that gives the city the legal authority under the court ruling that we mentioned earlier that, they're legally able to move people from public right away without having any legal consequences? Or is it unclear if there are even enough beds for people if they are displaced?
Yeah, that court ruling is tricky. It's, open to interpretation. We do not have enough shelter beds for the number of people who are homeless in our county. However, we do know that there are often open beds here and there, and that some of our mass shelters are not at capacity, and that's because people don't feel safe going there. But people who do want to go to those shelter beds, and they do call like our 211 number, which is the phone number you call and get help accessing resources. People have a very, very hard time finding a shelter bed when they want one. And it's really left open to interpretation, this law of, the bed that you're offering someone, like what's the standard? Do they have to feel safe going to it, or is just offering a bed that they don't feel safe? Does that fulfill the legal obligation? And I don't think we'll have a lot of answers to that until someone challenges the ruling in court for the first time. And I feel like that will happen in the next couple of years in one of the Western states.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation, Nicole, that in many ways, it feels like we're going backwards in some of our policies. And I'm curious what you hear from some of the social service providers and people who are experiencing homelessness. Does it feel like, here we go again?
Yeah, I did a panel discussion earlier this week with the district attorney, Mike Schmidt, and some of our local social service leaders, like the policy director at Central City Concern, which is our biggest housing organization. And they all said that sweeps are not a solution. They don't improve homelessness. It's only a solution for house people that don't want to see people who are homeless on their street. And so we're spending a lot of money visually making the problem better for a couple weeks, and instead of spending that money to offer people more concrete services.
And everyone seems to acknowledge that.
Yeah, yes. It's election season, and business folks, the community, they're real upset with things. And I think quick solutions to make people think things are better, are aimed at the voters, but they're not the ones seeing these people every day and serving them food and seeing what's actually happening. So they might think things are better since they're not seeing folks on the street, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is.
Yeah. And I know that the last time we spoke, we talked about some of the violent crime that we had seen in. Actually, I think I teed up the question to you, posing the national lens, not even realizing that we had multiple people, I believe, that week that we hadn't confirmed publicly that who were killed, who were experiencing homelessness in Portland. How have the last few months been since we talked? Are people feeling any more secure, or is it kind of the same situation where it's a really scary time to be living on the street?
Yeah, no, people don't feel safe. I believe the last time I checked, there were 7 homeless individuals who have been murdered this year. And it's hard to know how to protect people when we can't just put them into homes, because you can lock a door if you're in a house, but how can police protect folks who are the most vulnerable? That's tough. At the same time, there is a Safe Rest Village in Old Town that said they plan to shut down because their workers don't feel safe. So we're losing those beds soon. And from the mass Old Town sweeps that we have seen in the past month, there have been reports that crime reports have drastically decreased in Old Town. But we also know that folks who are homeless are not typically the ones committing the crime. They're often the victims of it. So I think I don't know what the best policy solution is, other than knowing that the community is safer when we are able to get people housed.
The West Coast cities are always lumped in as kind of having, quote unquote, the worst problem with homelessness, or the most visible homelessness. Are there any policies that are working well in other American cities that you're tracking? I know Houston was in the news this week. Tell us why that doesn't make sense, or what they're doing that is not applicable to Portland and Oregon.
Yeah, I haven't read that story yet, but I know what you're talking about. So I don't have great authority to fully comment on it. But the gist of it is that they provide housing to people, which seems super simple. Give people housing, then they're not homeless. So I don't fully know what came with that housing or what the program looks like in Houston, but I do know other states have done that, where they have created enough housing units for every single person who's homeless, put folks in the units, and then soon, a couple years later, they found that they had a homeless population again. And that's because new people become homeless every day. You also have to find ways to stop them from becoming homeless, ways to catch them. And also, if there aren't supportive services, sometimes people who are housed fall back into homelessness if the root cause isn't addressed. And a lot of that is mental health, and making sure those resources are there. And it is hard to compare, but I do know that Portland does have some pretty interesting programs compared to other cities, like the tiny homes and the Portland street response. And we have things that do work. We just need more of it.
And before I let you go, is anything from your conversations or people you were chatting with, you mentioned we're talking on a Thursday morning that you were down at the Blanchet house, but anything that will stick with you just from your work this morning that you want to leave with listeners?
That's a tough one. I'm on the spot now. I think not necessarily anything that someone said, but just seeing how calm people were when you give them a safe place to go was just mind-blowing. These folks that I've seen in dire stress and psychosis, when they're in a warm, safe place, they're completely different people.
Describe what you mean by that.
Their faces look calm. They're not tense and stressed out. They can relax and just enjoy a meal. They're not like on the defense. They don't feel like they have to protect themselves and always be fighting. Women on the street always have to like present themselves as aggressive, because if they don't, they get taken advantage of so easily. But here they know they're safe. They don't have to do that. Someone else is doing that for them. So they can just relax.
You are seemingly never relaxing. You are chronicling these stories that are so vitally important to our region so well, and even with construction out your window as well. But I appreciate you and all your work and the compassion and the thoroughness that you bring to it. So thanks for talking again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. I shared links to some of Nicole's recent stories in the episode notes. If you like this show, give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. It really helps others find the show. And tell a friend. Help spread the word. If you're interested in sponsoring Beat Check or any of our other podcasts, reach out to our marketing department at advertise@oregonian.com. We appreciate it. The best way to support our journalism is through a subscription to Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time.